Hello, good evening. Thank you for joining us. This is Jennifer Chester with Tetra Tech, and I will be assisting Xcel Energy with the virtual town hall this evening. We'll start with a short presentation to provide a program overview, review 2018 and 2020 accomplishments, and plans for 2021. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. To reduce background noise during the virtual town hall, all attendees will be maintained on mute. You can ask questions at any time by pressing *3 on your phone or by typing your question in the online portal. We'll answer those questions a little bit later. If you're on the phone and would like to join online to see the presentation slides and ask questions via the online portal, please go to xcelenergywildfireprotection.com. The online meeting works both on computers and mobile devices. If you are having connection issues with the online meeting, please call the meeting phone number at 855-962-1519 to listen in on the audio. We'll begin our presentation tonight with Ashley Valdez.
Thanks, Jen. Good evening. I'm Ashley Valdez, Area Manager for the San Luis Valley and Southern Colorado for Xcel Energy. We want to thank you for joining us this evening to learn more about the Xcel Energy Wildfire Protection Program. At Xcel Energy, we have a strong track record of preparing for emergencies because our customers and communities rely on us to power their homes and businesses and to keep the economy moving. We are happy to provide our community with this virtual format to learn more about the program and to get your questions answered by our team live. With us today, we have several representatives from Xcel Energy from various disciplines who will be presenting program information and responding to your questions. We have folks from our wildfire mitigation team, transmission, vegetation management, community relations, such as myself, and also risk, and our first responders community partners. Next slide, please. This is just to give you a snapshot about Xcel Energy. We serve 8 states with 3.6 million electric customers and 2 million natural gas customers. Xcel Energy has long been a national leader in wind energy since 2005. And since the early 1990s, we've supported energy efficiency and offer a leading portfolio of programs with options for all classes of customers. We lead the industry in initiating voluntary efforts to reduce air emissions and to help our states meet federal clean air requirements. We also have leading demonstrations in pilot programs underway to test advancing technologies, and one such program is the Panasonic partnership that we have at the Stapleton Airport with a battery project. Xcel Energy has earned numerous awards and accolades in the utility business sector, in corporate equity, and for our commitment of hiring veterans. Additionally, Xcel Energy is recognized as one of Fortune magazine's most admired utilities for 7 consecutive years, Corporate Responsibility Magazine 100 Best Corporate Citizens, among Newsweek's Most Responsible Companies, and multiple Edison Electric Institute awards for storm recovery. Next slide, please. Now to give you a deeper dive into Colorado and just a snapshot of our customer base here. As you can see, we have nearly 1.5 million electric customers, and on the natural gas side of the business, we have 1.4 million customers. And also, reliability, as you can imagine, is core to all that we do and does play a key factor in our fire protection program. Next slide, please. To give you a better perspective of Colorado's increased population, I wanted to touch on some information from a few years back. In November of 2018, the Denver Post reported the number of Coloradans whose homes are at risk from wildfires soared 45% from the 5 previous years, reflecting the state's booming population and changing use of agricultural lands according to state officials. At that time, the Colorado State Forest Service said 2.9 million people lived in wildland-urban interfaces, and that's defined as places where homes are built in or near areas that are prone to wildfires. And that represents about half of the state's population, and that was in 2018. So as we move and fast forward to 2021, we see that our population continues to grow and wildfires continue to be a key concern for both the urban areas and rural communities across our beautiful state. Next slide, please. So today what we'd like to do is provide you with an update on our wildfire protection program and the work that is underway at many levels. We're going to start with a quick level set about our program goals and key components. And then we'll take a look back at what we've accomplished in 2020 and a look forward at the priorities and plans for 2021. We will also discuss how you and your communities can get involved by providing feedback to help shape what our plan looks like going forward. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presentation program manager, Sandra Johnson, and she's going to give you further details about our program. Sandra?
Thank you, Ashley, and welcome all to today's town hall meeting. I am Sandra Johnson, and I'm the Wildfire Mitigation Program Director. I have many years of utility experience as an electrical engineer, and I've held various leadership roles. I took on this new position in 2019. As Ashley mentioned, we have many subject matter experts here today from our team, and we will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have based on the materials that I, Brian Long, and Tom Green will be presenting this evening. We're excited to share with you what we've accomplished in the last year and highlight our 2021 activities and programs. So I'll explain this map momentarily, but I first want to provide you with a little bit of background on the wildfire mitigation program. In 2018, the company took a concerted look at the risks associated with utility equipment leading to wildfires. At that time, we hired a utility wildfire expert who worked jointly with our engineers to look at our risks and develop initial plans to mitigate those risks. And then in 2019, the company formalized a team across multiple internal organizations to further develop and execute initiatives and reduce those risks. And here's where I get to this map. First, I want to point out that this map does not show all of our assets. It only shows the transmission and distribution assets in the areas of high fire consequence. And just as a reminder, transmission assets are the higher voltage facilities that make up the grid and transmit large amounts of power over greater distances. And the distribution assets are the part of the lower voltage system that deliver the power from the transmission grid through substations to the customers. To give you a little bit of perspective on our assets, in Colorado, we have nearly 2,900 miles of transmission that pass through the wildfire risk zone out of approximately 5,000 total circuit miles, so a little more than half. We also have 2,100 miles of overhead distribution feeder that make up the wildfire risk zone out of almost 10,000 overhead distribution feeder miles. So in order for us to develop these risk zones throughout our service territory in Colorado, it first began with identifying where those assets are in relationship to high fire consequence areas. In order to do that, we utilized the Colorado Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal, or the CORAP, which was developed by the Colorado State Forest Service. And this tool examines terrain, fuels, fuel moisture levels, and other criteria to identify areas that could experience significant fire consequences. The tool allowed us to understand where our assets were within these high fire risk areas of Colorado, and then further determine which assets, should there be a spark, would have the potential to cause the greatest consequences. Those facilities with the highest risk scores in those areas are what make up our wildfire risk zone. So this map shows our assets either with a red or a black dot. So the red dots are our distribution assets and the black dots are our transmission assets. And really what they are actual structures with a buffer of 1,000 feet around those assets. And all of these dots together are what we call our wildfire risk zone. And so if you look at this map, more generally speaking, you can see that the areas that we really are focused on are in the foothills and west along I-70 to Grand Junction, as well as south into the San Luis Valley. However, as you can see by this map, the wildfire risk zone is dispersed really throughout multiple counties, and we're doing work in each of those counties. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about our program here. And, oftentimes we talk about our program being kind of these three big areas. I'm going to break it up even a little bit further into four kind of buckets of work here. And so our entire focus is to minimize the risk of our equipment that could lead to potential wildfires. And so if we look at these four areas here, inspections and modeling, system hardening, operations, and community and industry, all of these together work to make up our plan. So first, let's talk about the inspections and modeling. So we're very focused on both accelerating inspections that we do normally, part of our routine work across the entire system to identify potential defects. And then we're also adding new and enhanced inspection programs in order to further identify equipment that may need repair or replacement. And so an example of some of those new and enhanced inspection programs would be we've added infrared inspections to our transmission and distribution circuits. This will help us identify equipment that may be operating at higher than optimal temperatures. We've also introduced helicopter inspections to gather LiDAR data or light detection and ranging. This allows us to model our system and really test what the capabilities are of that system to withstand high wind scenarios. And it also allows us to identify hazardous vegetation that are near our circuits. Another new inspection program is our drone program. This is allowing us to look at our assets in a whole new perspective, and we can get really up close, detailed inspections of our infrastructure, looking from the top down. This allows us to find or identify components and equipment that need repair or replacement. And Brian Long will discuss this initiative in more detail. The second big bucket of work that we do is our system hardening. And this is focused on making the system more resilient and less likely to experience equipment failures. And so we take all of those inspection results and study results from the first program, the inspections and modeling, and then we perform the repairs and replacements as required. This category also includes performing not only our routine vegetation management programs, of which we have a lot of, but also incremental vegetation management to further minimize the risks of ignitions that could be caused as a result of vegetation. And Tom will talk about one of these programs a little further in this presentation. The system hardening category also includes adding new state-of-the-art protection equipment out on our distribution circuits and our substations, and that will allow for more operational capabilities, flexibility, as well as early detection of certain types of fault conditions. We're also replacing or rebuilding sections of both our transmission and distribution circuits. For transmission, we've identified 8 transmission circuits that require numerous corrective actions or are near end of life, and we're accelerating those rebuilds to ensure safe operations and to improve reliability. For distribution, we've identified a total of nearly 400 miles of various conductor replacement projects to occur over the next 5 years. And making these corrections will strengthen the system and minimize the risk of conductor failures. And finally, as part of system hardening, we're programmatically replacing all pull-top equipment that could emit hot material during normal operations or failure mode. And we're replacing that equipment with newer devices that will not have the potential to become a source of ignition. And Tom will discuss these in more detail later. And then in operations, our third area of work, we're creating processes to improve our capabilities to make critical operational decisions more quickly and effectively, as well as developing operating protocols to reduce the risk of ignition during high fire risk days. So this work includes consulting with a wildfire expert with years of both firefighting and utility fire program experience, and he's helping us with our plan. We are also incorporating enhanced situational awareness, and situational awareness is just data that's around us, and we're gathering this data. Part of that includes information from our company meteorologists. They provide us with forecasts of fire weather conditions, as well as data provided from the U.S. Forest Service. And they forecast fire danger potential based on numerous weather stations that are located throughout the state. We're also piloting an advanced fire spread modeling platform this year, and that will simulate fire behavior based on current and forecasted weather and terrain conditions. All of these programs will inform wildfire risk and operational actions. Another thing that we're doing during high fire risk days, we implement fire-safe work practices while working in those high fire risk areas. And we incorporate wildfire prevention awareness during our daily job briefings. All personnel who are working in the field must adhere to increased safety protocols. We're also getting ready to deploy an operational pilot program this summer on a select group of distribution feeders, and this is for us to test those new system protection devices I mentioned. The pilot will evaluate situational awareness as well as our new settings that we are planning for. We'll also be able to look at the impacts of these new settings to our customers and our field crews. So overall, operational programs complement both the inspections and the hardening programs, and it'll allow for more conservative daily operations to reduce risks. And then finally, the fourth main component of our wildfire mitigation effort is focused on our community and stakeholder outreach and industry engagement. As we implement other aspects of our programs, it's imperative that we communicate and share our plans with all stakeholders. Since program inception, we've been actively meeting with communities across the state to share our plan, receive input and feedback, and respond to questions and concerns. We've held multiple meetings with regulators and other stakeholders, and we're always looking for ways that we can further advance and improve our plan. We've actively sought out industry leaders, peer utilities, and trade organizations to learn best practices, share best practices, and determine areas for program improvements. Next slide, please. So 2020 accomplishments, so there were many. And Brian Long's actually going to go through some of those in detail on the distribution and transmission system. But I do want to say that overall, we successfully executed our wildfire mitigation plans last year. In addition, we developed comprehensive training programs that I mentioned, and we also developed a wildfire monitoring and response plan. As I said previously, we did meet and collaborate with peer utilities and extended outreach to multiple communities. The other big achievement in 2020 was we submitted our first comprehensive wildfire mitigation plan to the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. The plan describes all of our programs in detail, and it's available via our website. We really do encourage you to go out and take a look. If you're interested, it does discuss all of the activities planned over the next 5 years. The Commission approved the wildfire mitigation plan earlier this year, and as part of that approval, we will submit annual updates to track the plan's efficacy as well as our performance in executing the plan. I'll now turn this over to Brian Long from our team to talk in more detail about the 2020 accomplishments as well as some of the things that we are targeting this year. Brian?
Thank you, Sandra. My name is Brian Long. I'm a structural engineer and focus on transmission asset management. I've been working in the utility industry for 35 years and with the wildfire mitigation team since its inception a few years ago. This slide highlights some of the distribution programs that we're working with. Distribution has met a vast majority of its goals in 2020 and is continuing work in 2021. The inspections highlighted here include what we call ground line inspection and assessment. Of the nearly 60,000 ground line inspections performed in 2020, approximately 1/3 of those were on poles in the wildfire risk zone. That assessment process involves analyzing the amount of decay and remaining strength of our distribution wood poles by excavating below the ground line and drilling into the pole. You can see in that photo labeled grain line inspections where the crews are working at the base of the pole. The pole is then assessed and either treated to extend the life of the pole, or it is replaced due to lack of remaining strength. Weak poles can fail, causing energized conductor and or the pole top equipment to come in contact with the ground and or vegetation, which could create a potential source of ignition. The drone inspections, and you see an image there of a top of a pole assembly with a cross arm, are a new program involving taking multiple images and having experts evaluate those images for defects. I'll provide some additional details on this program in an upcoming slide. As a result of both the ground line and the drone inspections and assessment programs, we identified 3,800 poles to be replaced in 2020. This year, we're upping that to nearly 4,500 poles, and by the end of 2025, we estimate we will be replacing a total of 15,000 poles in the wildfire risk zone. And you can see in the photo there where we're lifting a pole into place. And then we are doing infrared inspections, which involve looking at hotspots and connections or other equipment pieces. This work will continue in 2021 and is a key tool for us in locating possible areas of concern. That image is an infrared image off of a pole top assembly. Next slide. So on the transmission program, this highlights some of the successes as well as what we've been targeting for completion this year. There are always challenges when working with high voltage transmission, and the photos in the bottom of this slide are demonstrative of some of the issues we have to contend with to complete this work. The visual inspections include a ground line patrol of all the transmission miles in the wildfire zone for the purpose of identifying anomalies or defects. We also routinely perform inspections via a helicopter on all circuits greater than 200 kV throughout the system, which includes many of the circuits in the wildfire zone. We will continue the same level of inspections in 2021 that we completed in 2020. We completed 225 out of 229 targeted defects for correction last year. These defects include repair of all sorts of items like replacing equipment, including insulators, avian protection items, cross arms, braces, poles and towers, just to name a few items. We completed the design and procurement milestones on two 69 kV transmission rebuild projects that'll be in construction this year. That'll total 33 miles, and we expect to have those in service by the end of 2021. And finally, we completed the last of the wind strength review on the 69 kV lines in the wildfire zone, wrapping up the study for transmission. The wind strength review allowed us to determine the line's capability to withstand wind loads and other conditions needed for wildfire mitigation. And then next slide. The previous distribution slide mentioned a number of above ground line AGL inspections that were inspected. And I don't know if you caught it, but the number was 10,000. That's 10,000 poles we inspected by drone in 2020. And we're on track to do 10,000 again this year. The drone takes about 5 photos at each pole, so that's approximately 50,000 photos. At this time, we perform a visual inspection, and all this means is that we review those pictures, and they're examined by our qualified inspectors that have intimate knowledge of the equipment, and they examine every photo to look for defects and or potential sources of ignition. The slide shows a couple of types of defects we find using drones that we would never or have a difficult time seeing from the ground line. The slide in the middle is looking at insulators from a bird's eye view to check for degradation of the material. We did have some issues with these insulators when we looked at them. And then the slide on the right shows what's clearly some decay on the top of the cross arm. Anytime we find defects that are severe enough, we prioritize them for mitigation, either through repair or replacement. In the future, we hope to use artificial intelligence or AI for inspection, and we're working with the Electric Power Institute, commonly known as EPRI, which is the primary R&D organization related to the electrical utility industry. We're sharing our information to help them in the development and the use of AI. We are targeting to improve both efficiency and accuracy of the image review when we're developing this AI. Xcel Energy Xcel is also an industry leader in the use of UAS for beyond visual line of sight flights on the transmission system. All of the transmission circuits in the wildfire area have been flown and inspected under the UAS program. This information has been processed and included with the condition assessments along with the foot patrol results. I will turn it over to Tom Green for the team to talk specifically about this year's programs, our community outreach, and future plans.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'm Tom Green, and I'm an electrical engineer and part of the wildfire mitigation team. I've been with the utility industry for over 40 years, been with public service company for over 20 years, but only a year and a half with Sandra's wildfire mitigation team. You know, Sandra and Brian talked about the 4 primary program components with inspections and modeling, system hardening, operations, and the community and industry pieces. And I'll go into a little more detail on some of the system hardening, operation, and outreach programs. Remember, it all starts with the inspections and modeling, and then when we find critical issues that need to be addressed, we make sure we have a plan to fix them. So system hardening is the term that we use, and that really means making sure that our system, especially in the wildfire risk zone, is strong and resilient, and therefore less likely to fail. It means that we're replacing components and equipment that have been identified as having defects, which in our eyes, that means there's a potential risk of ignition, which we want to avoid. So anytime we inspect or model and find critical issues that need to be addressed, we make sure that we have a plan to fix them. We're also adding newer technologies where appropriate to determine how those might be beneficial for our system in the long run. So I just want to point out that, again, we aren't just doing all of these replacements on our entire system, but we're really focused on what we're referring to as the wildfire risk zone, which is a relatively small but significant part of our entire system. So I just wanted to start and talk through some of the programs that we have. And our conductor program is probably the biggest program we have following our pole replacement program. And the conductors, they're the wires on the poles and towers that carry the electricity. And Sandra mentioned in one of the previous slides that we plan to replace over 400 miles of conductor over the next 5 years. And starting in 2021, this year, our plan is to replace over 100 miles of conductor. And we have 3 programs that we'll talk about. And so I mentioned that our implementation includes not only repair and replacing, but also adding some modern infrastructure and newer type technology where appropriate. And the conductor program includes both of those, where we're replacing older components, older wire with stronger and higher capacity. But we're also looking at modern technology, and that's where that covered conductor program comes into play. In covered conductor, it's just like the name implies. It's the steel and aluminum wires are covered with a protective sheet, kind of like an extension cord in your house. And the idea there is that if something were to come into contact with that line, such as a tree or vegetation, or if the line were to fall to the ground, there won't be any fault or disruption of service due to that contact. And therefore, there's significantly reduced chance of spark or ignition. Covered conductor is really a common hardening technique in California, but some other Colorado utilities are starting to use that in their forested areas, and we're exploring that as well. Our covered conductor program is what we refer to as a pilot program. As with some of our other programs, we're starting relatively small. So in this case, it's only 16 miles of covered conductor, and we're doing most of that in the Boulder area. And again, it's a pilot program, so we'll be monitoring the performance of those covered conductors over time to determine if we might want to expand that program into other areas. The small conductor program, again, it's kind of as the name implies, these are conductors that are smaller than our more recent standard newer conductors, and these are mostly made of copper instead of steel and aluminum. They're smaller copper conductors, are older, they don't carry as much power, and they tend to deteriorate and are more prone to becoming defective. Our entire small conductor program consists of replacing 300 miles with the larger aluminum and steel conductors, and it's a 5-year program, and our plan is to replace about 60 miles a year. The last program we'll talk about is our bare secondary, and that refers to our lower voltage service wires. These are the 120, 240 volt lines that you find coming into your residence, but really they're the final path that comes into the customers. And many of these are uninsulated, and therefore bare, and we're replacing those with better quality insulated wires. This is a 2-year program, 68 miles total, with the goal of about 34 miles per year. And that might not seem like a lot, but it's really hundreds of spans when you think about, the smaller distances at those voltage levels. Going on to the operational program, and that was the third component that Sandra mentioned, and she talked a lot about that. And the operational side is, rather than replacing equipment, this program refers to how we're modifying the way we operate our system, again, with the goal of reducing any chance of ignition. And as she mentioned, that translates to how we operate the components that protect the system when there are faults. So when there's disturbances on the system, we open that part of the system up, usually automatically, and our operational program will ensure that when we restore the system, there won't be any chance of ignition. And again, that all starts with what we call situational awareness. And what that really means is that we want a good understanding of the wildfire risk conditions. And for us, that means daily monitoring of weather forecasts and what we call the burn environment. Are the conditions right for a fire to start and for that fire to have severe consequences? So at this time, we're looking at 2 primary indicators. That's red flag warning, which is an indication of critical weather and dry conditions that could lead to wildfire activity. And we also look at the U.S. Forest Service National Wildland Fire Assessment System, also known as Adjective Class Ratings or National Fire Danger Rating System. And you might know these more commonly as you see them on the signs when you're driving through Colorado. And sometimes you'll see a sign with Smokey the Bear pointing at a colored chart, and it indicates the fire risk. Is it low, moderate, high, very high, or extreme? And it's also color-coded. Green, blue, yellow, orange, red. And so whenever we have conditions for red flag warning or that fire danger is high, then we operate the system in what we call wildfire mode, which is a more conservative type of operation. And that kind of relates back to the operational pilot program that Sandra mentioned, where, when we have conditions that warrant and indicate there's a potential risk, we'll put some of the system protection devices on a select group of distribution feeders on more conservative settings. That last one there refers to the equipment upgrades. And again, this is another replacement program similar to the conductor replacement program, but this focuses on equipment located on top of poles. So if you ever look at the distribution poles as you drive by, sometimes you'll see equipment on top, such as the big can-like objects. Those are transformers, and there are other items on top of the poles, and they could be fuses. They provide another measure of protection, and lightning arresters, which protect the system from lightning, as the name implies. And some of the equipment, when it operates, especially the fuses and arresters, they can actually spew hot material, and that could fall to the ground and create a potential risk. So we're replacing that equipment with devices that will not emit any hot material. And in the meantime, as we're going through the process of replacing that equipment, we have a related incremental vegetation management program, and Sandra mentioned that earlier. And what we're doing with that program is actually clearing the vegetation around the base of poles where that equipment is located. And that provides another layer of protection against any hot material that might fall to the ground. With that clearing, there's a much less likely chance of ignition, and we call that our defensible space around poles program. If we move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the community and industry engagement. And again, that's the 4th key component that was in that circle that we mentioned previously. And when Brian was talking about drones, that was one of example of our industry involvement with the Electric Power Research Institute. That's one of just many organizations that focus on the needs of utilities and doing research and development work. We also interact with the Edison Electric Institute, And actually our CEO, Ben Folk, is the chairman of that organization right now. And our wildfire mitigation team, we attend a lot of seminars with these organizations, and we learn a lot about new technologies as they relate to wildfire mitigation. And we also meet with vendors of modern technologies, especially with regard to situational awareness. And I think we also mentioned working with fire spread modeling, which is a pretty exciting tool that we're looking forward to using in the future. With regard to local communities, in 2020, we had 2 of these town hall meetings. We made numerous presentations with, I think, every county that we operate in. And I wanted to mention our Colorado Utility Summits because I think that's really an important way to outreach with our other utility partners. And in 2020, we initiated this Colorado Utility Summit and invited all utilities throughout the state to come and share information about their wildfire mitigation efforts. And all of the major utilities were there. And we did that again this year, and we had over 20 organizations attend. And it was really a great opportunity to learn from other utilities, share information, and discuss how we can coordinate efforts, especially with regard to operation. Also wanted to take this opportunity to point out our website. Many of you have already gotten to this site through our website, but that's XcelEnergyWildfireProtection.com. It's a really good source of information, and we're doing our best to keep that updated. So if you have any questions or looking for material, or if you have any suggestions about that, please let us know, because that we intend to have that be a really primary source of information going forward for our stakeholders. We also have an email address there, so if you can't reach us individually, you can submit questions or comments through that email. And finally, we have a hotline phone number, so if you ever see anything or feel like something needs our immediate attention, you can call that hotline and we'll make sure to address your concerns. I think this is our last slide, and so to wrap things up, we're continuing with all 4 aspects of our programs: inspection, modeling, system hardening, operations, outreach. I think each of us have indicated that we have a lot going on, and we're implementing and executing all of our numerous projects. Everything that we've talked about today is described in more detail in our 2020 Wildfire Mitigation Plan, and you can find that on the website. And we're all really proud of that plan, and that was approved by the Public Utility Commission of Colorado this last year. Most of our programs are taking place over a multi-year period, and we've got plans to get every one of them done. We continue to look for ways to enhance our programs through emerging technologies and industry involvement, and we want to continue to inform stakeholders in forums like this through our community outreach. And I wanted to point out this picture that you see here. And 2020 was an epic year for wildfires in Colorado and the nation as a whole. And one of the big fires that we had that really impacted us directly was the Grizzly Creek fire. And this picture is taken from Glenwood Canyon following the Grizzly Creek fire. And we had several structures that had to be replaced. And this picture is you can see the linemen up there putting that back together. And you can see basically by the positions that they're in right there, they're pretty dedicated to their work. And that kind of leads to, just close by saying, Xcel Energy is serious about our wildfire mitigation program, and we're committed to our plan. Safety is a priority number 1 here at Xcel Energy, and everyone in the company is committed to ensuring the safety of anyone that's affected by our business. I want to thank our presenters. Thanks to Ashley and Sandra Johnson and Brian Long. But let you know that, if you saw that second slide up there, we've got a vast cross-functional team that just listed a few of the folks that really support us. I wish we could list all of them, but every one of them is fully supportive of our efforts. With that, I want to thank you again for attending, and I'm going to turn this back over to Jen, I think, and we'll entertain any questions or comments you might have.
Great, thank you, Ashley and Sandra, Brian, and Tom, for that really informative presentation. This is Jennifer Chester again, and thank you to everyone for submitting your questions to us. As a reminder, you can ask those questions at any time for the remainder of our time together, about 20 minutes, by pressing *3 on your phone or typing your question in the online portal. So we'll get going with addressing some of those questions. Steve, I'm hoping you can explain a little bit more to us about how folks work on identifying suspect wildfire areas. How do you quantify the number of poles or structures that could be impacted, and what do you do to manage those and address that moving forward?
Sure. Sandra Johnson, she discussed that at the beginning, that we are using the CORAP, and that is how we identify those areas that have the highest chance for a significant wildfire. And then we look at our assets within those areas, and that ultimately becomes our wildfire risk zone. So we use that tool from the Forest Service in order to identify that. And that really is the driver of our plan, to make sure that we are reducing risks of our assets in the areas with the greatest wildfire risk in the environment. And if Sandra wants to elaborate, she is welcome to.
Okay, thank you. Darren, could you talk to us a little bit about what you do to notify emergency management organizations if you're conserving energy due to high fire danger? And also, could you explain how you work with emergency management organizations to determine fire danger or share information about that?
Yes, I can. Thank you. What we're doing right now is we're aggressively monitoring, what I would say aggressive monitor subsurface sources and tools that we have at Xcel Energy. I will say that, some of the account managers that let people know, we try to work with them to make sure that the customers know that, we're going to have some issues with power during the day or something. I won't say that it's perfect. Even today, I'm located in Minnesota. Even today, we had some issues with some of our larger accounts that weren't aware, but some of our customers that conserve are on the program to conserve energy during certain days, which today was one of them. We're working on ways to better communicate that things through them, because usually what happens is the executives of most of these accounts get the notifications. However, our emergency management people aren't always in that loop, so we're working to close that loop and make sure that they get a more accurate picture of what we're looking at. No, that's probably not the best answer we're looking for, but we're continually trying to improve that right now, and we're working with new software and implementing that to make sure that everybody that needs to know is getting that information. So is it a solid, everybody in emergency management knows? No, but that's what we're continuing to strive to improve, and even throughout this year. So we're going to continue throughout this year to make sure that we partner with everybody and get those notifications out to them.
Thank you, Darren. Sandra, if a community-based energy resiliency program, or how might, a community-based energy resiliency program complement energy providers as they strive to harden and protect their critical infrastructure and other resources?
Thanks. So definitely any kind of resilience program would be a natural complement to all of the work that we're doing on our system. And so I think it's a great question and a great point. As we continue to evolve our program, that's one of the areas that we know we want to look into more. So certainly when we have these operational procedures that we're developing and we may have more conservative operations, Tom mentioned safety is our number one priority. Well, so is serving our customers reliably. And so we want to make sure that we can continue to deliver power reliably. So therefore, those programs really can go hand in hand, and that is something that we will continue to evaluate.
Thank you. Pete, could you talk to us a little bit about vegetation management and what you do in support of that for this program?
Sure. So I'm the program manager for Western Colorado, and we cover both distribution, transmission, and we're beginning clearing our high pressure gas lines. We have multiple programs running. The first line of that is routine maintenance. This is just going through on a standard cycle, making sure that all of the trees are trimmed back from the lines, making sure nothing's interfering, clearing out dead trees so that nothing can fall and impact the lines. After that, we also have a hazard tree program. This is sort of a mid-cycle patrol in between our routine maintenance cycle. We're going through targeting dead trees and any potential grow-ins that may not last for the entire cycle between maintenance. On transmission, we have our transmission wildfire protection program. We're going through clearing around the base of structures, reducing the chance of a wildfire burning through and taking out the transmission structures. That aids in restoration. More poles we save during a wildfire, the quicker the power's back on. We have a similar program on distribution, which was talked about, defensible space around poles. That's to prevent sparks falling from any equipment on the poles. So we're clearing grass and trees out to about 10 feet on those. Let's see. Missing any there? I think that's all of them.
Great, thank you. Sounds a lot, keeps you busy. Our next question up here is referencing a particular area of the state in the San Luis Valley and talking about the threat of wildfire posing a risk, but also loss of power during winter and other seasons being a challenge and potentially an economic impact. Ashley, would you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd love to. We do have a program down in the San Luis Valley in Alamosa, and it's a microgrid electrical system that contains multiple generation sources and loads, which can either be connected to the grid or intentionally separated from the grid. And that's part of our resiliency program. We have been working hand in hand with the emergency responders down in the valley to make sure that we're able to do what we need to do. The valley's an interesting geographical area for us, and so we're addressing capacity issues and then again the resiliency in the area to meet the needs that the community has. So we're happy to partner with Dave Osborne and his group, and look forward to other opportunities presented in the future.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Looking at the clock here, we have just about 10 minutes left and time to take a couple more questions as folks put those in the portal or press *3 on your phone. Next up, Tom, would you explain to us a little more about what emerging technologies the program is using or is considering using in the future?
Sure. One of the things that we really are excited about is fire spread modeling. And we talked a little bit about that in the presentation, but there is software available to us now that can actually predict how a fire might spread, and it uses weather conditions, current weather conditions and burn environment conditions, and you can actually model how a fire might start or spread if that were to happen, anywhere on our system. And you can look to see what the impact would be, how many acres it would impact, if there are any structures that it would potentially impact. And that's really going to be a great situational awareness tool for us to use going forward, because we'll be able to look at that, and when we have severe conditions, we can kind of see what the areas of highest risk are on our system and make even more informed decisions based on the result of that modeling. So that's just one that I really like to talk about.
Thank you. Pete, have you described some of the vegetation management activities that are part of the program? Could you explain a little bit more about specifically why do trees need to be removed or pruned? People around people's homes or businesses, trees that have been there for a while.
Sure. A tree growing into the power line can cause multiple issues. We could either have reliability issues, either causing a power outage or even just causing issues with the general reliability of the power. So you might have sort of gray outs, things like that from the tree impacting the line. Additionally to that, we could have trees falling in, taking out the power line, potentially causing fires. And so when we're out there, we're looking to maintain clearances so nothing grows in. But additionally, we're looking to remove any trees that do have defects, either from pine beetle, scars from new construction, damage from snow plows, things along those lines. So we're doing a visual inspection of the tree, just looking for any of those issues, trying to reduce the risk of falling.
Thank you. Sandra, could you explain a little bit about why this program is happening now? Xcel Energy's always been prepared for wildfires. What makes things different?
Thanks. Yeah, good question. So wildfires are nothing new, certainly nothing new in the state of Colorado. But what has changed is the frequency and the intensity of the events. And so what we have to do to keep up with that is first of all, acknowledge that it has changed and that it is now an increasing priority for us as a risk to our utility. So, we always have that safety mindset, but we need to adapt accordingly. And so it really was necessary to take a different look at our system and really analyze the high-risk areas or those high-consequence areas that I mentioned previously. And so, there are many things that have now come into play that weren't there before. And, we can talk about the pine beetle epidemic and forest health, and, certainly that has been an issue that we've had to contend with. There are climate issues, extreme drought, high winds. We have more red flag warning days now, and every year that increases. And also we have to acknowledge that people are moving into the wildland-urban interface, or the WUI. And as a result, we have, more people who are in these areas where there's a higher risk for fires. And so our strategy has had to adapt accordingly. But yeah, certainly it's always been something that we've dealt with. We've made sure to operate our system in a way to minimize that risk. But as I said, in 2018, we took a concerted effort. We really brought everyone to the table to see what else can we and should we be doing.
Thank you. Well, looking at the clock, we have just 5 minutes in our time here. We'll take one more question, I think, and then we'll close out the presentation. A lot of work was described this evening in the program, whether that is inspections or vegetation management work. What's done to notify landowners or businesses, residents about work on their properties and the program itself? Sandra or one of the area managers?
I guess I would hand that over to maybe Craig. They deal with the public regularly. Do you still have Craig?
Craig's not on coming off of mute.
Yeah.
Pete, could you describe what
Can you just repeat the question?
Sure. I'll just rephrase it. Pete, could you describe what you do to notify residents or business owners, property owners, when you're planning to go out and do work?
Sure. We have multiple levels of notification for our tree work. For our service, we have an organization that works directly with them to make contact to let them know that work will be taking place. our community relations area managers. We meet with them at the beginning of the year to communicate our book of work, and that gets sent out. They communicate out to some of the local areas. We have job planners through our contractors who go through and meet with individual property owners, letting them know that work will be taking place. We also do a call out based on the area impacted by the work. So we're able to pull together phone numbers based on billing record to send out a phone notification saying we'll be in the area.
Thank you for explaining that. Well, we are wrapping up here at the end of our time together this evening. We appreciate everyone joining us for the presentation and all of the great questions that were asked of the team members. If you have any additional questions, concerns, or comments after we close out this evening, reminder that you can contact the Wildfire Protection Program toll-free at the hotline, 833-352-0087. Also by email, info@xcelenergywildfireprotection.com. You can also visit the website at xcelenergywildfireprotection.com to find that contact information and all of the information that the team referenced during the presentation today. We thank you for attending this virtual town hall, and we look forward to communicating with you all. Thank you.